Good evening and welcome to everyone present. We will reconvene the conditional use hearing momentarily, but first I want to express my regret for not being able to attend in person this evening. I unfortunately am attending to a family medical emergency. However, I will be fully participating in tonight's hearing. We will aim to break around 9:30 p.m. this evening, and that will be flexible based on where we are at in the proceedings. Should we need to recess, Board Vice President Matt Vahey will do that. And with that, I will now turn things over to Solicitor Clark.
Thank you, Commissioner Hecker. This is the continued hearing for the property located at 1209 Rydal Road. Just as we ended the last hearing dealing with issues related to party status, we will begin this evening with taking care of some party status matters. The following individuals appeared at the October 16th, 2023 meeting and requested party status. And at that time, they were told that we would be taking it under advisement. The following individuals have been granted party status for this hearing: Diane and Keith Reynolds, Raymond Lynch and Lisa Kimbrough, Rosemary Patricelli, Barnett and Freda Satinsky, Margaret Bess and Karen DePrima, Marcus DeRuda, Marilyn Nyman, Susan and Thomas Stone, Cheryl Hurley, Bruce Bach, Joseph Doherty, Edward Traufer, Blythe Cease, and Roger Cohen. The following names that I'm going to read off live within the 750 feet that we discussed at the last hearing and are automatically being granted party status. If I am calling your name, that means that you did not fill out a party status form at the last hearing, either because you didn't attend or you just didn't fill one out. We'd ask that sometime before the conclusion of this evening's hearing, if you are present, if you could fill out a party status form, and my colleague Greg Heleniak over there will have the forms. That includes Geraldine Irwine, Radislav and Diana Kramer, Marla Cochran and Eric Warren, Colleen and Mark Mealy, Craig Fingerud and Irina Vantrub, Stephanie Barong, Zygmunt Pines and Eric Roberts. And again, if you live within 700 feet, you're automatically granted party status. Before we begin, because you are within the 750 feet, you filled out a form and you were granted party status at the previous hearing. Is there anyone here this evening who was not granted party status at the prior hearing, granted party status a few moments ago, or asked to fill out a form who is requesting party status? If you are, I'd ask that you come forward, state your name and address. Seeing no hands, we will, oh, okay. Please come forward. And do you live with, please state your name, please.
I'm sorry?
You're within 750 feet. You filled out a form. Well, you're within the distance we're allowing people in, and you filled out a form requesting party status. And it was granted.
Your next name? If you're going to speak, we're going to be
Yeah. So,
oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Booth, you were at 1440 Orchard Hill Lane. You've previously filled out a form and you live within the approved
Oh.
distance. You have party
That's what I
status.
thought. You were a little, I got a little confused on the not here last week thing. So
Okay.
thank you.
If you go to the microphone, please.
Your name, sir?
Joseph Ruch, R-U-C-H. I live at 1605 Woodland. So not within 700 feet. But I would like to become party to this process.
Your address again, Mr. Roosh?
1605 Woodland.
You were not appearing on any of the lists.
Yeah, I was not in any prior meetings.
Okay, did you receive a notice of the hearing from the township?
I was out of town, yes, that I did.
But you received the notice from the township?
I don't know if it
Okay.
was email or mail, I'm not real sure, so.
So as we are doing, Mr. Roosh, with individuals whose names or addresses we can't confirm, we're going to take your request for party status under advisement. And then when we can confirm the location, which may happen during the course of this hearing, we'll let you know whether or not you're being granted.
I
party
have a
status.
driver's license to prove my address, if that helps.
I understand that. We're looking at distances.
Yeah,
So we're
okay.
just taking a look at that
Can I
now.
have a seat?
You should.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Clark, just because there's confusion regarding who has party status and who does not, if we can leave a copy of the list somewhere for people to reference, and that way,
Sure.
if there's an issue, they can fill out forms later and make application.
We can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please come forward. Give your name and your address, please.
Hi, my name is Kim McKenzie. Mackenzie. I live at 1441 Huntington Private Road that runs between Woodland and Huntington. Is that all you need?
Yeah, again, did you receive notice from the township of this hearing or of any prior hearings?
I think we did. My husband sent it to me.
Okay. And as you've heard, we're just going to need to verify your address, the distance to the property, the subject property, and then you'll be granted party status either at a later date, either later in this hearing or at the next hearing.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Reed Sandner. I'm at 1727 Woodland Road, and I'd like to request the party status. Sandner.
Did you receive notice of the hearing from the township?
I got a flyer in my mailbox the other day. I've been out of town.
Okay. Again, we're going to need to confirm your address.
Fine.
Right.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Because I think we're getting close to the Guinness Book of World Records for party status, so.
Oh, last name Mettercheck at 1112 Rydal Road. Roberta Mettercheck, Metterchick.
And your address again?
1112 Rydal Road.
You'll be granted party status.
Thank you.
Mr. McHugh, do you have any questions for Ms. Mettercheck?
I don't.
Anyone then on our road would as well? We're within that 750, is that correct?
You've been granted, if you're within 750, you're not within 750, but
Okay.
you're within the distance that we are allowing.
Allowing.
for
Thank you,
people
sir.
to be. Yep. Okay. And Vice President Vahey just pointed out a good point. to discuss what party status means maybe again. Party status means that you want to be a participant during this hearing. That means you want to present your own testimony, you want to present witnesses, you want to cross-examine the witnesses that Mr. McHugh puts up or that any other party puts up. Party status doesn't mean that you can come to the podium at every time to make comment. We're going to be a little bit relaxed with regards to the form of asking questions, but you're actually going to be an active participant in the hearing. It doesn't just mean that you're going to get notice or things along those lines. So with that in mind, I'm assuming you still want party status.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, and your name is?
Elizabeth Burton, B as in boy, URTON,
And your address?
1419 Rydal Road.
$14.90 Rydal?
1419, 1419.
Purple. Maybe you have a different idea of purple than I do.
Mr. Clark, I have that address listed as one of the ones that was held and then granted.
Marcos de Ajuda.
The
Yes. Same address as Marcos de
Yep.
Ajuda.
You'll be granted party status.
Thanks.
I'm not certain.
If you give
if-
your name, please, and your address.
Barry Hicks, that's Barry Hicks, 1532 Cherry Lane, HICKS,
And your address again?
1532 Cherry Lane.
We will attempt to confirm your distance from the subject property during this hearing. If not, we'll do it in between this and the next hearing. So
Okay, thank you.
John Rush, 1403 Woodland Road. RUSH.
did we just take someone else under advisement from that address? No? My apologies. The address again?
1403
Okay.
Woodland.
Mr. Rush, again, while we're verifying addresses and subject and distance to the subject property, we'll take this under advisement and hopefully either be able to let you know tonight or before the next hearing.
Thank you.
Michael Grimes. I live at 1441 Orchard Hill Lane. GRIMES.
1441 Orchard Lane. Mr. McHugh, Mr. Grimes lives within 210 feet of the property. Do you have any questions for Mr. Grimes?
I don't have any questions.
You'll be granted party status. Anyone else? Before we begin, and we turn it over to Mr. McHugh to begin presenting his witnesses and his case, I just wanted to briefly let everyone know a little bit about the sequence of events, the sequence of how this hearing will go this evening. As we indicated, Mr. McHugh will call his witnesses. I believe he intends on presenting two witnesses this evening. Mr. McHugh will examine his witnesses. And then at that time, the Township Solicitor's Office with Mr. Heleniak asking questions will then ask questions of any of Mr. McHugh's witnesses. Following the questioning from Mr. McHugh, any members of the Board of Commissioners who are present this evening who would like to ask questions of Mr. McHugh's witnesses will do so. We will then turn it over to anyone who has been requested and granted party status. Since I have communicated a little bit about this procedure with Ms. Wellheimer, I was going to ask you a question before we begin. So if you could come to the podium, I would appreciate that. To the best of your knowledge, have the neighbors come up with a process for how they intend to cross-examine witnesses this evening? Are they going to designate one person to do the questioning for them, or is it going to be just a lot of people coming to the podium and asking questions?
Sure. Gail Weilheimer, 1282 Rydal Road. What we have tried to do to streamline the process is people have volunteered for different topics. So for anyone that has party status, we ask that you first defer to whomever has volunteered, and you'll know who that is because they'll speak first. And if anyone who has party status after the individual who has volunteered for that topic, so for example, Kathy Driscoll is taking the lead on traffic. If there are any questions that have not already been asked between the township solicitor, the Board of Commissioners, and Ms. Driscoll, then anyone with party status can supplement that. But we are hoping that the people who have volunteered on particular topics can at least help streamline the neighbors' concerns.
Thank you. Everyone will have the opportunity to ask questions who's been granted party status. We will be going to the designated people first after the commissioners. Perhaps if your questions are being asked, you may not need to ask a question. If you do come up and want to ask questions of the witnesses, we are a little bit more relaxed than a courtroom regarding form. But you are required to be asking the witnesses questions. It's not an opportunity to just come up and make statements or to argue with the witness. We are going to hold you to some form with respect to the questions that you're asking. When it comes to public comment, I just want to remind everybody that there will not be public comment, just general comment, until all of the testimony is in at the conclusion of these hearings. And we're not going to finish tonight, obviously. So there are going to be more hearings that are going to be held. So if you're here to make comment, you're not party status, we are not going to be doing that at the end of every night. We're going to be doing it when the hearings are all over with. So with that out of the way, Mr. McHugh, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I will call John Anderson, our civil engineer, first.
Yes, I do. Certainly. John, John, Anderson, Anderson.
And John, I think you have the mouse up there, and we have our exhibits preloaded. They're on the Adobe tab. So when we get to the various exhibits that I identify for each test, that you pull them up using that tab. John, can you identify how you were presently employed? Is that working?
No. Is there an on button?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I think we're able to get them up through IT. Okay. John, can you identify how you were presently employed?
Certainly. Again, my name is John Anderson. I'm a principal engineer with Cornerstone Consulting Engineers and Design Services, a principal partner in that firm since 2002. And I direct the majority of the civil engineering work for our company.
And are you familiar with the proposed development of 1209 Rydal Road in Abington?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And up on the screen right now is a copy of what I'm going to have marked as Exhibit A1. Can you identify this?
Certainly. It's my CV, basically listing of who I am, my experiences, my licenses, and so forth. Again, I'm a licensed civil engineer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I've been licensed since 2002. I hold various licenses throughout different states. I've been employed with Cornerstone for over 20 years and had subsequent employment throughout my career with other engineering.
Have you ever, great. Have you ever testified before a municipal board in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, such as the Board of Commissioners that were before this evening?
Yes, I've actually been able to present before the Board of Commissioners of Abington Township, the Zoning Hearing Board of Abington Township, the Planning Commission of Abington, and many different municipalities all over the state of, or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and also many states surrounding Pennsylvania.
And have you ever been accepted as an expert in civil engineering, either before Abington Township or other municipal boards?
Yes, I have.
Mr. Clark, we're happy to go through more of Mr. Anderson's qualifications in greater detail, but at this point, I'd like to offer him as an expert in civil engineering and design, and certainly make him available for any voir dire as to his qualifications from the township or the other parties.
So what Mr. McHugh is asking is that Mr. Anderson be admitted as an expert in civil engineering during the course of these hearings. Mr. Anderson is well known to me. He is, I know that he has been qualified as an expert in many municipalities throughout southeastern Pennsylvania. If anyone who has party status wishes to question Mr. Anderson regarding his qualifications, you can come to the podium now. Having said that, it is more than likely that we will admit Mr. Anderson as an expert in civil engineering.
No, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Civil engineering is an extremely broad area.
Can you state your name for the
Yes,
record?
I'd be happy to introduce myself. You'll be hearing from me. My name is Dr. Bruce Bach, B-A-C-H. I am a resident in the township. I live at 1408 Stockton Road. I have party status granted by your oral statement at this hearing. My point being is
No,
that
there's not a time to make a
no,
point.
no,
Your point is, Mr. Bach, this is going to go on forever and ever if we're going to start doing this. Do you
fair.
have any questions for the
Yes, I
witness
do.
regarding
Yes.
his qualifications?
I have a question for you, and
A-
a question for this fine gentleman.
Ask
Okay.
Mr. Anderson his
Civil
question.
engineering is an extremely broad rubric. As a civil engineer will tell you, it
You have a
includes such things.
question
The
for
question
Mr.
is,
Anderson.
his statement is, I am responsible for coordination, management, and design of multifaceted projects. No statement about healthcare facilities, no statement about his particular expertise in drainage, no statement about his particular expertise in water provision, soil, erosion, none of that. Civil engineering is like saying, I'm a doctor. It's a big topic.
Mr. Bach, are you going to ask the witness a question?
Yes, sir, I am. My question is, how much of your time has been spent on design and or rather being a professional manager of projects which have been included, and how much of your experience is related to construction products of high density in residential neighborhoods?
So the majority of my tenure in civil engineering has been in the design and actual permitting of land development applications that consists of anywhere from small projects of less than an acre, gas stations, convenience stores such as Sunoco, Wawa, Royal Farms, all the way up through commercial, other commercial land developments with large multi-residential apartment complexes, senior living facilities. I've done a number of senior living facilities with various companies, and many of them have been constructed. I specialize in the land development field of civil engineering with regards to preparation of land development documents consisting of site and zoning plans, grading and utility designs, off-site utility extensions, off-site grading and easements, stormwater management that consists of projects obviously less than an acre on up to over 75 acres that are very complicated with regards to Commonwealth state practices with NPDS applications, with regards to Joint Chapter 105 permits, which are stream encroachment permits, well-versed in pretty much all matters of stormwater management with regards to projects of this size, larger, and even smaller.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Anderson regarding his qualifications? No, you have to come. Yep. No, please, please, please.
Bruce Cox, 1544 Cloverleaf Lane, COF.
Please speak into the microphone if you can.
Bruce Cox, 1544 Cloverleaf Lane.
And have you been granted party status?
I believe I have.
Okay.
My wife and I. I'd just like to ask Mr. Anderson, who do you work for?
Sorry, please leave the microphone because you have to make.
Mr. Anderson, who do you work for?
I think he's been identified as working for the applicant.
Right, well, why is he an expert witness to this then? I don't understand that. He
Because-
works for the company that is asking for approval. Doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other people who've been granted party status who have a question for Mr. Anderson? Seeing no other hands, Mr. Anderson will be admitted as an expert in civil engineering.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Anderson, are you the civil engineer for the development project at 1209 Rydal Road?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with that property?
Yes, I am.
I'm going to ask that what is marked as Exhibit A2 be placed on the screen. And John, can you just identify that exhibit?
Certainly, it's an Exhibit A2 is an overall aerial taken from Google Maps. The red dot in the center of the page shows the existing conditions of the 1209 Rydal Road property surrounding we'll call it plan right, or right where the cursor is. This is Woodland Road as it comes down to Valley. And then the other side of the property abuts Rydal Road. And this right here where the cursor is the existing, I'll call it a state house is the only, it's the residential structure that's on the property, and that fronts off Rydal Road.
And are you familiar with the general size of the subject property?
Yes, I am. It's it's currently 7.316 acres.
And do you know what the current zoning classification is for this property?
Yes, it's R1.
And have you prepared development plans for the subject property?
We've prepared a conditional use set for the subject property, which was submitted in support of this application.
And can you just briefly give an overall overview of what the proposed development is? Just general high level overview.
High level overlay.
Oh, you want to go to the plans? Yeah, we can put the plans up. Exhibit A3, please.
So looking at Exhibit A3, this is the sheet one of the set. The set consists of a number of sheets to help identify how this project can be constructed. This is an overall site plan and subdivision plan. The overall property is 7.316 acres. So to orient us on this particular plan, on the right-hand side is Woodland Road. On the left-hand side is Rydal Road. Right in here, sorry about the text, is the existing estate house. The project proposes to subdivide the property into two lots. It's currently one consolidated lot. We're going to subdivide into two, with lot one being the residential piece to be carved off, and lot two being the subject of this hearing this evening, which is development of a senior living facility.
And can you describe what the approximate size of the proposed lot 2 will be?
So lot one will be 1.62 acres and lot two will be 5.69 acres.
Okay. And just generally speaking, what is proposed on lot 2 from a building perspective?
So on lot two, which fronts solely on Woodland Road, two buildings are shown surrounded by parking and access drives. The two buildings consists of building one will consist for a senior care facility.
Please don't yell out. Mr. McHugh, please continue examining Mr. Anderson.
So
go ahead, John.
Sorry, building one is this U-shaped building in the center of the parcel. The U-shaped building consists of a 74 unit, 82 bed assisted living memory care It's a three-story building. Its footprint is 20,850 square feet with a gross floor area of approximately 42,000 square feet. And then it has an underground parking facility underneath the building, right towards the rear of the building, that provides additional parking for this building and also its sister building towards the right.
Okay. Just going back quickly to proposed lot 1 where the single family dwelling will remain. Do you know whether that proposed lot will comply with the provisions of the zoning ordinance?
Yes, we've designed it so that it would provide or be permitted as a by right application. And yes, it complies with all components of the zoning code.
And no variances will be required for the use or the creation of proposed lot 1?
That is correct.
Okay. As to now proposed lot 2, which is the development lot, do you know whether the senior living facility, as you described it, is a permitted use in the R1 zoning district?
It's permitted as a conditional use within the R1 zoning district.
And could you just identify which of those uses each of the various elements of the senior living facility are?
Sure. The independent living and assisted living units are considered a use E10, life care facility and memory care. I'm sorry, E10 use. Life care facility and memory care units are considered E12 nursing home.
Great. And you've already mentioned, but did you prepare conditional use plans that were submitted as part of this application?
Yes.
And could you just briefly describe those?
Certainly. So the set that we've submitted is consistent of 7 sheets. Sheet 1 is a site plan that shows what you're seeing above on the screen right now. It shows the creation of 2 lots, one being a residential single family dwelling, and the second lot consists of the senior care facility. Sheet 2 is an existing conditions plan, basically shows the contouring, the utilities, the various environmental features on the lot. Sheet 3 is a grading plan to show that we can construct or design the site so that it can be built on this particular property. Sheet 4 and sheet 5 are landscape plans to show how we can comply with the various landscaping components of the township zoning code, as well as tree replacement characteristics, buffering, and so forth. Sheet 6 is a lighting plan for proposed lot 2. We did not design a lighting plan for lot 1. Sheet 7 is a truck turning plan for proposed lot 2.
And the plan that's up there right now, is that a revision with the latest date of August 21, 2023?
That is correct, yes.
And have these plans been revised throughout this conditional use application process?
Yes, we originally submitted as part of a conditional use. We received township engineer reviews, high-level reviews concerning zoning and the use aspects that are required within the zoning code. We've subsequently revised the plans a number of times to comply with those review comments.
And to your knowledge, have all of those review comments been addressed in the most recent plan submission?
Yes.
Okay. I'll ask that exhibit A4 be placed on the screen. And John, could you just briefly describe this exhibit?
Certainly. A4 is a graphical representation of the site, of the property. The majority of the views are fronting off of Woodland Road. One of our design partners that was working on the project has preliminarily designed architectural building floor plates as well as elevations for the building. Our office has taken those drawings and superimposed them in a realistic, manner to give an overview or a view of how this building would sit on the property. So as we're looking at this sheet, there's 4 components of it, starting in the upper left-hand corner. It's an elevation view of the building looking from Woodland Road. It's the northernmost entrance into the facility, and you're looking at the corner or the main entrance corner of building 2. As we go in a counterclockwise fashion, the photo below it is a view from Woodland Road looking at the southernmost access point. Again, looking at, all you can see from this vantage point is building number 1. And then the bottom is more of a graphical representation of the 2 buildings as they sit from a vantage point a little bit north on Woodland Road into the site. And then as we continue, the upper right-hand corner of the page is an overview, again, looking mainly from a site view above the house, across Woodland Road, looking at the top of the both buildings. And you can see how the parking has been designed and laid out, the entrances to the facility, and how the buildings sit on the property.
And I just want to clarify the upper left-hand corner pictures. Those are renderings of building number 2, correct? The independent living building?
I'm sorry, building number 2,
Okay,
correct.
correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
building number 2 is fronting on, is closest to Woodland Road. Building number 1 is in the middle of the property.
Right. And building number 1 is the U-shaped building.
That's correct.
If we can move back to Exhibit A3. John, could you just describe the proposed access to proposed Lot 2 off of Woodland Road?
Certainly. Off of Woodland Road, as we if we're heading, I'll call it a northerly direction along Valley, we would hit the intersection of Valley and Woodland, making a left onto Woodland. We'd proceed in a northerly fashion. We'd first encounter our first driveway onto Woodland Road. That is a right out only movement. And as we continue on north on Woodland, we would have more of a full access movement, which would allow lefts into the facility, rights out of the facility. And I believe that we're considering a modification of only allowing lefts in and rights out of that driveway.
So let's describe that a little bit more. What is currently shown for that northernmost driveway on the plans right now?
What's currently shown is a full access movement. Again, as you're proceeding north on Woodland, you'd be able to make a left turn into the facility. If you're proceeding south on Woodland, you would be able to make a right turn into the facility. If you're exiting, you would be able to make a right or a left proceeding north or south.
So right now, you'd be able to make any type of movement that you wanted out of the facility onto Woodland Road, lefts in, lefts out, rights in, rights out.
That's correct.
And are you aware if the developer is proposing a modification to that access point?
Yes, as I alluded to just a few seconds ago, the idea would be to limit the available movements in and out of the facility from that driveway, which would limit it to lefts in and rights out only.
So practically, what is the impact of that driveway modification to access to the site?
To prevent vehicles in a southerly movement on Woodland from accessing the site.
So all traffic instead would have to travel down Woodland to the intersection with Valley.
That's correct.
And there wouldn't be an ability to travel northernly on Woodland?
That's correct.
Okay. And is the developer willing to agree that restriction and driveway modification as a condition of any approval?
Yes.
Okay. Now looking at the overall site plan, can you describe how vehicles will circulate through the project?
Certainly. Again, as we're talking about the northern driveway entrance, that would be the in movement for vehicles. If you're heading into or you want to access building number 2, you would enter the driveway on the northern side of the property. You'd be able to immediately stop playing with that. You're going to immediately be able to make a left turn into building number 2's parking area. There's a number of parking spaces in the front of that building. It also allows for full circulation throughout the parking area. You can either come back out to the main entrance come back out to the main northerly entrance, or you could exit or leave the site via right turn movement out onto Woodland. If you wanted to go to building number 1, you would continue proceeding into the site even further. There's parking spaces on the northern side of the building. There's also an access point into an underground garage that's basically centered in the building. And then there's a parking area underneath the garage. There's a little inset in the plan that shows the circulation of that parking field. You could also access in the middle of the building by making a left-hand turn, proceeding between the 2 buildings. There's a number of parking spaces here. There's drop-off spaces, ADA spaces. There's the primary loading zone is right here. And then as you continue to the southern property line, basically we're creating what we call a hammerhead turning movement to allow trucks to be able to turn around and exit back out of the facility.
And does that hammerhead also provide for emergency vehicle access and circulation?
Yes, the primary is for truck turnaround and also for emergency services vehicles to access all the backside of those buildings. Yes.
Sure. Okay. Can you describe what the proposed parking facilities are for the senior living facilities?
Yes, we're proposing a number of different parking components associated with both buildings. There's a drop off and pickup space for each of the buildings independent of each building. We also have a number of ADA spaces, basically accessible parking spaces for people with handicap passes. There's handicap or ADA spaces in front of building number 1. There's ADA spaces in front of building number 2. And there's also drop-off spaces associated with each building independent. Again, there's passenger vehicle parking along the northern side of building number 1. There's also parking underneath in an underground garage. And then parking for building number 2 is primarily in front of its location or front of its frontage in between the building and Woodland Road. There's a total of 118 parking spaces proposed on lot 2. 34 are located underground underneath building number 1 and 84 surface parking spaces. There are 5 ADA spaces, 3 for building number 1, 2 for building number 2. Also 5 spaces associated with the independent living units are covered. Those are located just under the L of the building number 2. As I stated earlier, each building has a reserved drop-off space near the entrance, and those drop-off spaces are in addition to the 118 spaces required. And 3 of the underground garage spaces will be designated to be equipped with EV charging. And finally, as I was indicating, there are the primary loading area is in between the 2 buildings. It is screened with a screen wall at its southern end. We anticipate utilizing this space is only for loading. However, the code requires additional loading spaces, and we've shown 2 additional loading spaces within the hammerhead or along the southern property line. Again, we don't anticipate utilizing those, but because the code requires additional loading spaces, we are showing them on the plan. We are able to, and I'm not necessarily the person to talk about operations, but we are able to schedule all our incoming truck and drop-offs for the facility.
Are you able to describe what the proposed stormwater management facilities will ultimately look like for this project?
As I've indicated, this is a conditional use set. This is not a land development set. And what that means is we've tried to comply, we've complied with all components of the use characteristics within the zoning code. However, this has not been submitted for a land development application that would contain all the detailed grading stormwater management facilities for the site. However, for this particular property, to try and consolidate its development in a smaller footprint, we would be proposing underground stormwater detention facilities to comply with the Abington Township subdivision and land development and stormwater management codes. Along with this will require a submission for NPDS, which is a state permit associated with stormwater, post-construction stormwater management.
And that design and those permits will be handled during the land development process.
That's correct.
Now I want to move into the specific conditional use standards for this development. Are you familiar with the requirements for a use E10 life care facility in the zoning ordinance?
Yes, I am.
And is it your opinion that the independent living and assisted living units meet the definition of use E10 life care facility?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And are you familiar with the minimum dimensional requirements for use E10 life care facility?
Yes.
And does proposed lot 2 comply with those requirements?
Yes, the minimum lot size is 5 acres and proposed lot 2 as subdivided will be 5.69 acres.
And are there other additional dimensional requirements?
Yes.
And can you just run through each of them and let us know whether they comply?
Sure. There's a minimum lot width of 300 feet. The proposed lot 2 is 311.9, so it exceeds the minimum. The minimum lot depth is 300 feet. The proposed depth is 474 feet, so it exceeds that. The minimum front yard setback is 100. The building is building 2 is set back from the front yard of 115.04, so it exceeds the minimum requirement. There's a minimum side yard setback of 50 feet. Proposed lot 2 is a side yard setback of 100.7 on the north and 50.8 on the south. There's a minimum rear yard setback of 50 feet. The proposed lot 2 rear yard setback is 84.72 feet. 84.72 feet. So minimum rear yard is 50 and we're showing 84, so we exceed the minimum. There's a maximum building coverage of 40%. The building coverage proposed for lot 2 is 13.2. So we're well under the minimum or maximum, I mean. There's a maximum impervious surface coverage of 70%. Impervious coverage for lot 2 is 38.8%. There's a minimum green area of 30%. The green area proposed is 61.8. So we are over double the minimum green. There's a maximum building height of 40 feet. The proposed maximum building height is 37.5 feet. Maximum building length of 160 feet. And our lengths do not exceed that. I believe they're designed right at 160. There are minimum building separation of 30 feet. The separation between the two buildings is 61 feet.
Okay, so in conclusion, does the proposed development of lot 2 meet the dimensional requirements for UC 10?
That's correct. Yes, it does.
And are there density requirements associated with UC 10, and can you explain those?
Certainly, the proposed independent living and assisted living units are considered apartment dwelling units under the zoning ordinance, and our permitted density is 24 dwelling units per gross acre. Proposed lot 2 has a gross acreage of 6.038 gross acres. A density of 144 dwelling units would be permitted based on 24 dwelling units per acre. We are proposing 113 dwelling units that would qualify as use E10. Including the memory care units, there are a total of 120 dwelling units proposed. As a result, the project complies with the density requirements for use E10.
Are you also familiar with the unit mix requirements that are associated with use E10? And do you know if the project complies with those?
Yes. The zoning ordinance requires that we have at least 2 unit types within this facility. One of the unit types has to be a minimum of 25%. We have 3 unit types: independent living, assisted living, and memory care. Both independent living and assisted living are both in excess of 25% of the total units.
And we have another witness who's going to go through the floor plans and overall unit mixes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Going through each of the individual conditional use requirements in the ordinance, do the conditional use plans clearly designate the intended use for each structure and building?
Yes, it does.
And will the proposed use and development comply with the safety standards as contained in the minimum property standards issued by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development?
Yes, we have a more qualified witness that will testify to that, but yes, it does.
Okay. Will the proposed development be in conformance with the regulations of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Again, we will have another witness that has more specialty in that, and yes, it will comply.
Will the proposed development comply with the requirements for distance between buildings, which I believe you testified was 30 feet?
The minimum distance between buildings is 30 feet. The building separation between the front of building 1 and the rear of building 2 is set at 61 feet.
And are there any accessory structures located on this property?
Not on lot 2.
Okay. Does each building have a required drop-off area for use by personal vehicles and vans?
Yes, it does. There's a drop-off space for each building type located near the entrance of the building.
Are all buildings used by residents of the facility provided with a 6-foot pedestrian walkway that interconnects the facility and connects to the street front sidewalk?
Yes, it does.
And can you just briefly describe where those pedestrian connections are using Exhibit A3?
Certainly. We are showing a proposed sidewalk along Woodland Road along the frontage, and the exhibit is showing in these hatched smaller areas the 6-foot concrete sidewalk that allows for pedestrian movement throughout the facility, around the parking areas and so forth. The striped out areas within the parking area are for designated pedestrian walkways from the sidewalks through the parking area and into the buildings.
Are all roads in the proposed development going to be privately owned and maintained and built to according to township specifications?
Yes.
Is the required green space going to be privately owned and planted and maintained in accordance with the open space standards and township ordinances?
Yes.
Is the open space or green space limited to passive recreation only?
Yes, it is.
Okay, now we're going to move on to what is the use E12 nursing home requirements. Do you believe that the memory care units meet the definition of a use E12 nursing home in the ordinance?
Yes, I do.
And are you familiar with the dimensional requirements for use E12?
Yes.
And are they identical to the dimensional requirements for UC 10 that you just testified to?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and we're not going to go through each of those individually again, but does proposed lot 2 comply with each of those requirements?
Yes, it does.
And are there density requirements for UC 12 nursing home?
Yes.
And can you just explain those?
Yes, the ordinance permits a maximum density of 36 beds per acre. It doesn't specify between gross or net. So we took the net acreage. As I indicated before, the net acreage is 5.69 acres. So based on that calculation, 205 beds would be permitted on site. We're proposing 11 memory care beds, which qualify under E12 nursing home. And there are a total of 143 beds in the entire development. The project complies with the density. In my opinion, the property complies with the density requirements of use E12.
So just to clarify, when we're talking about UC 12, we're only talking about those specific memory care units that are part of building 1.
That's correct.
Okay. Can you confirm that those memory care units are not self-contained dwelling units, meaning they don't have complete kitchen facilities?
They do not.
Are you aware if there will be any accessory uses associated with the memory care units and contained in building 1?
Can you repeat that?
Are there any accessory uses associated with the memory care units that are in building 1?
Yes, there are additional accessory uses, but that can be provided by our expert witness on the senior living care facilities.
Okay, now we want to go into the various parking requirements. I know you already testified a little bit as to the parking, but can you explain what the parking requirements are under the ordinance?
Yes, they're a little complicated. For use E10, the zoning ordinance requires 1 space for each employee on the largest shift plus visitor parking. Visitor parking is calculated at a rate of 1 space for every 5 beds plus 1.5 parking spaces for every independent living. The code actually has a discrepancy that it indicates one in the text, it indicates 1 1/2, but the number in parentheses is 1. So we use the larger of the two. Regardless, we use 1.5 parking spaces as the requirement. For use E12, the zoning ordinance requires 1 space for each employee on the largest shift plus visitor parking at a rate of 1 space for 5 beds. For the use E10, there will be 19 employees on the largest shift, 26.4 require visitor parking spaces, 69 spaces for independent living units, which equals a total of 115 required off-street parking spaces. For use E12, the required employee parking has already been calculated as part of the E10 parking requirements plus 3 required spaces for the 11 memory care beds, which equals 3 required off-street parking spaces. So the 115 for the E10 plus the additional 3 for E12 gives you a total required of 118 spaces. We are showing the 118. There are additional spaces on top of that for the drop off. So a total of 120 if you're looking at it from that perspective.
Okay. Also, are you aware of whether there are any steep slopes on the property?
Yes, there are.
And if we want to pull up the next sheet, just go down 1 sheet on Exhibit A3. There we go. Can you describe what this plan shows, John?
Yes, so this is sheet 2 of the plan of the conditional use plan set. This is basically a existing conditions plan or a property survey. Our office, in association with our licensed professional land surveyor that works for our company, his team surveyed this property, surveyed surrounding Woodland Road on the right-hand side, Rydal Road on the left. And as you can see on the property, the lines that are parallel to each other are contour lines, and the dark shading, 1 foot intervals. The dark shading areas.
Anderson, I'm going to direct you not to respond from anyone who is shouting out from the audience. And that's because if we start this, we're just going to have people yelling out questions all night long, and we're going to get maybe halfway through his testimony before it's 9:30. Okay.
So in the goodness and the fullest dialogue, there if parameters were given and if the plots were explained a little bit more than black and gray. Thank you.
Mr. McHugh, you can continue examining your witness.
Mr. Anderson, can you describe what the various shadings on this plan show?
Certainly. The contour lines or the parallel lines, they're dashed on this particular exhibit. The lighter shading are slopes of 15 to 25%, and the dark shading are steep slopes in excess of 25%.
Does the zoning ordinance permit disturbance of steep slope areas?
Yes, it allows for disturbance of slopes of 25% and greater, and disturbance of slopes between 15 and 25%.
And are we disturbing any of the steep slopes in connection with this project?
Yes, but to fully answer your question, you're allowed to disturb slopes greater than 25%. You're allowed to disturb 10% of those, and slopes between 15 and 25, you're allowed to disturb 25%.
So as to what's our actual disturbance of steep slopes on this property?
So we're disturbing, for slopes greater than 25%, we're only allowed to disturb 10%. We're disturbing 9.7% of those slopes. For slopes between 15 and 25, I'm sorry, let me step back a second. For slopes 15 to 25, slopes 15 to 25, we're disturbing 25% of those slopes. So we're maxing out our area of disturbance for slopes 15 to 25, and we're less than 10. We're at 9.7 for slopes greater than 25%.
And all of that disturbance is on proposed lot 2.
That is correct.
There's no disturbance of steep slopes on proposed lot 1 where the single family home is.
That's correct.
Okay. I know we briefly touched on this, but have we received review letters from the township in connection with this project?
Yes, we have.
And go back. So is it your opinion that we comply with the disturbance requirements for steep slopes in the zoning ordinance?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now going back to the review letters, have we received review letters from the township?
Yes, we have.
And have we addressed all the comments in those letters?
Yes.
And aside from the conditional use approval that we're here for this evening, do you believe that any zoning relief would be required either for the subdivision of the property or the development of proposed lot 2?
No, we do not need any zoning relief.
And you acknowledge that we will need land development approval for the development of proposed lot 2?
That is correct.
Are you anticipating seeking any substantive design waivers from the township subdivision and land development ordinance as part of the land development process?
No, at this time. No, we're not seeking any substantive design waivers.
And when we were before the planning commission, one of the comments that we received, I think, from a resident was regarding a potential waiver for the configuration of the lot lines. Is that something you're able to address?
Yes. What that was referring to was the configuration of lot 1 being a non-typical or standard lot configuration. Because we are well under the density requirements associated and the development for building coverage and impervious coverage, we can redesign lot 1 to show a more typical lot layout than what we're showing on this plan without violating any of the zoning parameters that we had just testified to, or I just testified to earlier in this hearing.
And was the intent of the lot line configuration simply to just carve out the residential single family dwelling as its own parcel?
That's correct, yes.
And if you were to make a more traditional lot line configuration, would it trigger any variances or any other relief required from the zoning ordinance?
No, it would not.
Those are all the questions I have for Mr. Anderson.
Mr. McHugh, I'd ask that you give the microphone to Mr. Heleniak. After Mr. Heleniak asks questions, we will then have members of the Board of Commissioners who wish to ask questions. And then after they are done, we will begin with party status, and we'll ask that you come to the front here and begin to ask your questions. We'll get to it a little bit more in detail after the commissioners ask their questions. So, Mr. Heleniak, you can ask your questions.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Anderson. As Mr. Clark said, my name is Greg Heleniak, and I'm one of the township solicitors. Be asking you some questions to provide some clarity to the Board of Commissioners as they review this application. First and foremost, can I ask that Exhibit A2 be put on the screen, please? Mr. Anderson, you mentioned that this is an aerial of the surrounding area, correct? The property and the surrounding area?
That's correct.
How would you describe the character of this area?
Traditional residential development.
Would you agree that the primary housing type in this area of the township is single family dwellings on fairly large lots?
Yes, sir.
You also mentioned traditional residential area. The roadways in this area, in your expertise as a civil engineer, are they particularly designed for low impact traffic, high volumes of traffic?
I think there's a series. I'm not a traffic expert. We do have a traffic expert
Understood.
here. So in my experience, they're designed as residential roads and collectors throughout this area.
Thank you, sir. So there are two buildings on this property, correct? You said building one is the U-shaped building in the center of the property, and maybe it would be helpful if we went to exhibit A3. So building one's that U-shaped property, correct?
Correct.
And you said that has a footprint of 20,850 square feet.
Correct.
What is and perhaps I just missed this, and if you can clarify for the Board of Commissioners, what is the footprint of building 2?
I think we skipped over that. Building 2's footprint is 11,894. That's the footprint. Gross floor area is 37,000.
So we're roughly looking at a footprint of buildings on this lot 2 as about 32,000 square feet footprint.
That's correct.
Now, about the placement of the buildings, and if I can direct your attention to the southerly property line of lot 2. If I'm reading the plan correct, the building 1 is noted as being located as about 52 feet from the property line of the nearest residential property. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And the as you referred to it, hammerhead loading area is located within that side yard.
That's correct.
And so what would be the approximate location of the hammerhead loading area in relation to the nearest residential property? I know it's not dimensioned, but
No, I know. I'm just going through it. About 20 feet.
So that's from the edge of pavement closest to the residential property, about 20 feet.
That's correct.
So I know you mentioned the township requirements, and I believe you said you reviewed the full zoning ordinance, or at least relative to this proposal, correct?
Correct.
And there's some discretion granted to the Board of Commissioners as to loading zones, correct?
Yes.
So the proposed loading zones here in the Hammerhead, they're fairly large, correct?
In the Hammerhead, they're the minimum size they need to be based on township zoning ordinances. The Hammerhead design looks fairly large, but it's mainly to allow for access to the end, almost the ends of each building for emergency services vehicles. We originally did not show additional loading areas in that vicinity, primarily because based on our use of the senior living, both buildings and its combined uses, one loading dock or loading zone in between the two buildings would be sufficient for this facility.
And what type of vehicles are anticipated to be utilizing these loading zones?
Maximum vehicle would be a WB50, which is a tractor trailer, and an SU30, which is a single unit 30-foot wheelbase, which is a trash truck. Okay. And then there may be some smaller delivery vans, a box truck, which would also be a 30-foot truck, or even smaller, depending on the vendors. They would also be able to access the loading zone in between the two buildings.
And that loading zone that you're indicating is in between the two buildings and up against the residential property, the residential area of that building, correct?
Rephrase that.
If I don't have a mouse or a laser pointer, I apologize,
That's all
but about if we're going from the bottom of the plan up, it's about the first half of adjacent to the first half of the U-shaped building, correct?
So this is the area that we're designating. This is the areas shown with the pointers, the loading area. The rear of this loading, which would be facing the southern property line, would be have a screen wall of 6 feet to assist in screening that loading zone.
Thank you. While we're in that area, you mentioned the drop-off zones, which are required by the ordinance, correct?
Correct.
So the drop-off zones are proposed as one space for each building?
That's correct. Building number 1 will have a drop-off space in this corner near its building entrance. Building 2 will have another drop-off space right here near its primary entrance, which is in the corner of the building.
Outside of signage, is there anything to distinguish those drop-off zones from any other parking space?
They're slightly larger. They're 12 feet in width to accommodate typically a passenger van that would fit within a normal parking space, but it allows for ADA accessibility out of the van. So they're 12 feet wide by 18 feet deep. I'm sorry, 12 by 20. So 12 foot wide by 20 feet deep. They would have signage, and also signage in the form of a sign in front of the parking space, and also striping and designated wording in the asphalt itself.
Does that include the parking space outside of, and I'm going to confuse these, building 2, the drop-off zone? Does that have that same striping and accessible?
Yes, both drop-off spaces are 12 feet wide by 20 feet long.
But it doesn't have the accessible lane next to it, is that correct?
So the drop-off space for building 1 does have an accessible lane, and this parking space or drop-off space for building 2 does not.
I understand that we also have a traffic engineer here, but I'm going to ask you certain questions related to traffic and planning or parking as to your design of the site. I know your testimony reflects that you meet the calculated parking requirements under the ordinance based on the number of beds that have been indicated,
That's correct.
as well as the number of staff, correct?
That's correct.
Has outside of providing based on the calculation of the number of beds, has any type of demand analysis been done related to the parking requirements versus the actual operation?
Correct. We actually have a witness that will be testifying on this project that can give you more accurate information as far as parking demand. But I can tell you that we are overparked for this facility. Our original parking did not anticipate needing this, or not. Our original parking design did not show this many parking spaces.
Thank you. And to the second part of my question related to the traffic planning, or the design of the traffic routes, you mentioned that that the developer would accept a condition of approval that the driveway would be, you say, left in and right out?
So the northernmost driveway would be restricted to left in, right outs.
And that's left in for vehicles traveling in a northerly direction on Woodland. They would then make a left into the property. That would be the only movement that would be permitted in.
That's correct.
Is that based on this plan, is that the only point of ingress to the property? Is that left movement off of Woodland?
Yes.
There's no ingress in the more southerly entrance point, correct?
No, sir. It's a right out only.
Based on that, could you maybe help the board understand what vehicles would do if they are traveling south on Woodland Road and wanting to access the property?
Well, the idea, since this is a facility that people that know the facility and understand the facility and have people that would be residing here and employees, They would be familiar with the site and accessing the site via northerly direction on Woodland. The idea is to cut down on cut through traffic through Woodland Avenue.
Understood that the majority of the traffic would be regular visitors, but I guess I'm anticipating the less than attentive grandson who only visits grandma on Christmas and Easter, who may not be as familiar. If they're coming down Woodland from the center of Abington, what would be their recourse after they can't turn in? Can you address that?
They would basically proceed in a southerly direction and proceed to a more appropriate turnaround point where they can make not a U-turn on the street, but make a more appropriate turn if you're abiding by traffic to access the northerly Woodland entrance.
You spoke a bit about the steep slopes on the property, and I believe you said that you're at, is it 9.7 in pushing into steep slopes that are above 25%, and this plan maxes out the 15 to 25% allowance?
We're allowed to disturb between slopes 15 to 25%. We're allowed to disturb a maximum of 25% of those slopes. So we are at 25%. For slopes in excess of 25% and greater, we're only allowed to disturb a maximum of 10%, and we're at 9.7. The way we achieve the limits or not exceed those maximum numbers is we have a retaining wall along the perimeter of the property on the northern side and the call it the northern side of building 1 and the westerly side of building 1, which that is shown as a retaining wall within the plan and in the grading plan. We submitted a grading plan as part of the conditional use set to show that we can comply with the zoning code.
And as you said, you reviewed the zoning code. So I was to direct you to the conditional use criteria contained in the ordinance under section 1806. The first point there is consistency with the goals, objectives, and recommendations of the township, and the various plans and studies that the township has prepared related to planning in the community, including the township and county comprehensive plans, the open space, recreation, and environmental resource protection plan, and the revitalization plan, and any other plans adopted by the township. Have you reviewed them as part of your design of the site?
We actually have a planning consultant that's part of the witness list that will be providing testimony on those questions.
Thank you. The next one is suitability of the proposed use for the property in question. You've mentioned the access and the steep slopes. Is the use or the scale of the use being proposed here suitable for the property?
Yeah, in my opinion, it is. I mean, we are complying with the maximum, the minimums and maximums within the zoning code for these uses. Our building coverage is well under the maximum allowed. Our impervious coverage is well under the maximum allowed. It's a permitted use as a conditional use within the code. And so we feel that we are in compliance with those requirements. Yes.
The third is community character, and it's described as the impact of the proposed use on the surrounding community shall be considered. And if the proposed use is adjacent to a residential district, the scale of the use shall relate to and complement the surrounding area, including the location and design of parking areas being in harmony with preserving the general appearance and character of the area, as well as can you address how this use is compatible and complementary to the surrounding area as you described it?
As I said, it's a permitted use as a conditional use within the zoning code for this district. So what we've tried to do is design the unit count that it's lower than the maximum allowed per code. We have tried to consolidate the development as small as possible to not exceed or brush up against the minimum lot sizes, impervious coverages. We've shown a robust landscaping plan. All trees that are removed during construction are being replaced twofold, and they're shown on the plan itself. We have designed a significant landscaping and buffering design to mitigate the impacts of this development on the surrounding community.
The next point is a nuisance and safety analysis, and primarily this relates to both noise, odor, and air and lighting pollution. Based on the location of the parking and the buildings as you've described them, what would be the impact of lighting and noise on the adjacent residential properties, since that's what this area is populated with?
So we design a lighting scheme to be a more residentially designed lighting levels that are in the lighting guidelines of 1 to 2 foot candles. We fully shield those light fixtures, and what I'm talking about is the parking lot fixtures associated with the parking areas that would illuminate the parking. We design those so that it's more of a residential feel and design of 1 to 2 foot candles. We shield those. We have shorter light fixtures for that illumination. All building oriented light fixtures will be fully shielded down lights. We design with LED fixtures that are very good at projecting light down on the pavement instead of producing extensive glare. So we feel that we've done a very good job at trying to design the lighting levels so that they're the lowest possible and they don't have any spillover onto the neighboring properties.
Have you performed any observations of this area in the evening hours when lighting would be?
Yes, I've
necessary?
driven through this area. Yes.
Is that kind of lighting present in this area currently?
No.
Is that lighting, would that lighting be visible and impactful on the surrounding residential properties?
It would be potentially visible from the immediately surrounding residences. Yes.
I know you already mentioned that there would be a traffic engineer that would be testifying, so I'll reserve any clarifying questions related to traffic impact for the traffic engineer. Related to public utilities, has an analysis been done as to whether there is available sewer service, available water service in a capacity that can service this density of a property?
We haven't made any applications to the Sewer Water Authority.
Just 1 second, please.
Mr. Anderson, some people had difficulty hearing your answer. Can you repeat your answer?
Certainly. I said we have not submitted to the Sewer and Water Authority as part of this project as of yet.
Mr. Anderson, one other question. I know that you testified that the density for the independent living units on this property would be calculated under the 24 dwelling units per gross acre calculation.
Yes.
And that's the calculation for the apartment dwelling units, correct?
Yes.
And under the E10 life care facility continuing care use, there are multiple options given for development of a life care facility, correct?
Yes.
And those include village dwelling unit, which is described as a small detached dwelling unit resembling a single family dwelling unit and intended for occupancy by a single family unit. A large apartment building, which is the multifamily dwelling, and a dependent care facility. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this would be the large apartment building?
Correct.
And based on the 3 available options for this use in the R1 district, would it be your opinion that the large apartment building option be the most appropriate option for a life care facility?
in order to stay within the bulk and area requirement of the zoning code, yes, that's the appropriate building for this particular project.
All right. Mr. Clark, that's all I have. Thank you.
Do any members of the Board of Commissioners who are present this evening or who are online wish to ask any questions of this witness? Commissioner Brown, if you can just identify yourself for the court reporter.
Sure. Jeffrey Brown, Commissioner, Ward 6. Just want to clarify the distance of the hammerhead turn from the nearest residential property. Was that 20 feet?
20 feet.
Okay. Thank you. Second question I have was, are you assuming that all workers, residents, and visitors will always have their own personal transportation to this facility? If not, have you planned for access for public transportation and how that will affect the planning of the site?
So a lot of times, and again, there's multiple witnesses that can better answer that question for you. But the majority of the residences that live in these facilities tend to bring a car, but then not use it and sell it off, and they don't need a car. They find out that a car is not needed, primarily because of the vans that are associated with the facility that will shuttle people back and forth to different areas of the township and community. As far as the workers, there's probably, I don't know exactly the percentage, but there's a percentage that would use public transportation. Again, we have a traffic engineer that can answer that question. So like I said earlier, we're at 118 parking spaces plus additional spaces for other uses. That is well in excess of what we typically would design for a facility of this nature. I'm not sure if I answered all your questions.
So that's a no. There's no plans for public access for public transportation currently in the plan.
That's correct.
Are there any other commissioners who are present who wish to ask a question? Any commissioners who are online? As we discussed earlier, we understand that some of the residents who have sought party status have designated an individual who they're going to ask questions on their behalf, depending on the subject matter. The testimony we're hearing now is from Mr. Anderson, the civil engineer. So I don't know if there is someone who is designated for that role. Clark. Okay. Ms. Cease, we're going to ask that you come forward. You can grab one of these seats over there if you'd like, and you can, so if you need something to write on. And again, we're going to not hold you to the same formalities that they do in a court of law, but we're going to ask that this be questions and not sort of statements and that or arguing with the witness, but just ask him questions, and he'll do his best to answer you.
Understood. Oh, sure. Kim, last name is Cease, S-E-E-S-E. And I'm 1443 Woodland Road. So in order to have conditional use approved, one of the criteria that the Board of Commissioners is considering is that this development will not have a negative impact on public utilities. So I'd like to ask just a few questions regarding public utilities specifically. You do not plan to have a septic system on site, is that correct?
No, this would be hooked up to public water and sewer.
Okay. And are you aware that when the sewer system was installed in this area in the mid-1900s, a senior care facility was not an approved use for this property?
Nope.
Are you aware that at the time that the sewer system was installed in this area, it was zoned exclusively for low density residential development?
I'm not sure the sewer facility was zoned just for residential, but no, I was not aware of that.
Okay. So I think we can all agree that wastewater is not only toilets, but also showers, sinks, kitchens, and every drop of water that ends up in our sewer system. So I'd like to quantify that. If you had to guess, how many bathrooms are there in an average single family home in this neighborhood?
2.5 to 3.
Okay. So that's 2.5 to 3 bathrooms and a kitchen, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this development will have 2 buildings. How many toilets in total will there be?
I'm not the witness to answer that.
Well, you did develop the plans and you talked about how many different units there would be and how many different buildings there would be. So why can't you answer and quantify that? If there's 120 units, how many bathrooms would there be?
Over 120.
Okay. And how many showers?
Over 120.
How many sinks?
Over 120.
Okay. And how many industrial kitchens?
No industrial kitchens.
Okay. So how will communal meals?
I would classify it as a commercial kitchen.
Okay. How many commercial kitchens?
1.
So there'll be 1 commercial kitchen for both units.
Both buildings.
Correct.
Yes. The independent living would have their own facilities, but the communal kitchen would be for the memory care and assisted living.
Okay. So that's a lot of water going out. You mentioned earlier that you have not done any stormwater analysis. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I just like to let the record show that we've contacted George Wrigley, who is the Director of Wastewater Management for Abington Township, and he confirmed.
You cannot, that's hearsay. You can't talk about conversations you had with someone else. You can ask questions. If you want to call Mr. Wrigley at a later time, you're free to do that.
So I'd also like to ask some questions specifically to Exhibit A3 that you showed earlier. Can we pull that up? So in the middle of the page, there's a depiction of a proposed retaining wall. Can you share the purpose of that retaining wall? It's right there. Yep, right there.
If you're referring to the wall along the western side of building number 1 and along the top edge of the parking on the northerly side, it's a retaining wall to reduce grading as it extends into the rear of the lot.
Can you clarify what you mean by grading to the rear of the lot?
So this is a sheet that's contained within the plan set. It's the grading plan sheet. It shows to the left side of the property, left half of the property. This is the existing house or dwelling, the existing contouring associated with the property. And then towards the right-hand side of the page or plan right, you can see that these darker lines are our proposed contour lines or our grading lines that show how we can access from Woodland up into the site. And then the wall basically cuts off any disturbance associated to the northern side and the western side of that wall.
So disturbance for the 2 buildings on your property, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you clarify what the 7 boxes just below the 2 buildings are?
Right here?
Correct.
Those are residential lots.
Okay. And how would you describe the positioning of the homes of those lots in relation to the property? And I'm asking specifically regarding, are they above, below, or would you say at grade with your property?
Below.
I'm sorry, below?
Below.
Okay. And in your opinion, what will happen to all the water in a heavy rainstorm when it rushes down the steep slope and runs into your proposed retaining wall?
It pitches, the actual site pitches towards Woodland. It doesn't pitch towards the retaining wall. Although site water will be graded towards collection inlets that would collect the stormwater and pitch it to an underground detention facility. So we would prevent water from heading down towards those residential lots that front on Doral Road.
Okay, so the water is going to hit that retaining wall in the middle, and none of it is going to come down, as you said, to the lots below grade on Doral Road.
I misunderstood your question. So you're referring to as the water runs down, we would propose collection of that water as needed. Again, we haven't designed a full land development document, land development plans or submitted that. That is, if the applicant is successful, that's part of the next phase of approvals. And that would be reviewed by your township engineer, also state agencies as well.
That would be reasonable in a normal hearing, but this is conditional use and you have nothing about stormwater analysis here. And that's one of the criteria that the commissioners are going to be considering. So that's why I'm asking the question to you. So it appears to me that a lot of the impervious surface, so also known as surface that water cannot soak into, is situated towards the middle of the lot. Is that correct?
The middle of the overall property at 1209,
Correct.
I would say it's situated on the right-hand side, but from the middle to the right-hand side of the page, yes.
Okay. So in your opinion, what will happen to all of the water that comes down the steep slope that you showed earlier? You showed the dark gradient and the light gray gradient, which sits just above that retaining wall and just above all the impervious surface. So my question is, when it's been raining for 48 hours and the ground is completely saturated and water keeps hitting your lots, your parking lots and your rooftops, what will happen to that water?
It's collected in an underground stormwater management facility and then would be discharged over time, most likely through drainage piping network within Woodland Road.
So it is going to be collected that way, or you're saying that once you get to land use down the road, you will have a plan that proposes that?
Correct. We would have to submit fully engineered land development documents that show compliance with stormwater management.
And you have not done so. You've shown nothing tonight to show us that. Now, although stormwater management is one of the important criteria that the commissioners are considering, is that correct?
It's not included within the plan set.
Understood. Okay, so I just want to close quickly. They have shown nothing regarding.
Nope.
Okay.
You can ask questions.
All right. I have no further questions. I think everything speaks for itself.
So, so we're now going to take public. Those who have been given party status, who now want to ask questions, are going to be given an opportunity to ask questions. Again, just like we saw with Ms. Cease, it's not a time to make statements, it's a time to ask questions. And when you come up, ask all of your questions, because we're not going to allow people just to keep getting back in line to keep asking questions. Come up, give your name and your address, and I'm assuming everyone who's coming forward has been granted party status. And if not, Mr. Heleniak will wave his arms at me and we'll ask you to sit down. So please come forward.
Thank you.
My name is Joe Ragg. I live at 1440 Woodland Road. And I have, I think, 3 questions, as long as they don't lead to other questions. Okay, the first question was, you've suggested that you're going to a proposed modification for left in and right out. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Can you explain to me why you're going for that modification? What are the reasons why you've changed your approach?
I believe the developer wants to prevent or through traffic along Woodland Road.
Okay, so the traffic folks will address the traffic going up and down that road.
That's correct.
How about the emergency vehicles?
What's the question?
The emergency vehicles, do they have to go left in and right out, or can they do whatever they want? Because the hospital's at the top of Woodland Road, so I'm curious as to whether or not they'd be restricted to left in and right out, as everyone else is.
Yes, they would be restricted.
So they have to go down and around and up to get to Abington Hospital, if that's where they're going.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to understand. And then the only other question, this is pretty simple, I think. You suggested that the largest shift has 19 employees. Is that right?
That's correct.
Does that include nurses, doctors, everyone else that attends that facility, or is that just the people that serve the beds? And
we have somebody else in the witness queue that will be able to answer that question.
Okay, and that will I'm just trying to understand if that is consistent with the regulations that the state has put out as to the number of beds and people.
Again,
Somebody
there's a-
else will? Got it.
Correct.
That's all I had. Thank you.
There was a woman standing up first, so I'll let her come first, and then we'll try to just.
Julianne, Juliannne, Peterson, Petersen, 1437 Dorel, Dorel Road. Good evening. I have a couple of follow-up questions for some of the information that you presented, and I apologize that I did not catch the number of the picture renderings, which show the overlay of the facility with what it would look like on the properties, if you wouldn't mind. But yes, perfect. Thank you. Do you have any renderings of what this would look like from the vantage point of the houses on Dorel Road?
No.
Okay, and you had said earlier that Dorel Road is downgrade or downhill, colloquially, from these facilities or the proposed building 1 and building 2, correct?
Yes.
So coming from from Dorel Road, looking up at these, you don't have what we would be seeing from our backyards to show to the commissioners?
No, the closest perspective view is the upper right-hand corner. And then, slight view here. No, we don't have a view of that.
Okay. Right. We'll stick to asking questions. If you could go back to the exhibit that was just up, which shows the quote hammerhead. Thank you. So I understand that they may or may not, I'm sorry, one back from that. They may or may not be using the loading docks at the, let's call it the bottom of building 1 and building 2, but they're there based on zoning requirements. Was that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you also said that that area is for turnaround of vehicles,
Correct.
and that was 20 feet from,
It's turnaround for delivery vehicles, not your typical passenger vehicle. There's plenty of room and other locations for that.
okay, I guess I'm just having trouble understanding if the vehicle in question is a tractor trailer and the loading zone primarily to be used is in between the buildings. Where does the truck turn around?
It would pull into the hammerhead, back down the hammerhead, and make a right-hand turn.
But I thought you said that there was a screen there.
There is a screen. So a vehicle would be entering this corridor, would proceed westerly back into this area of the hammerhead, pull forward and back into the loading dock. There's a screen wall right here.
Got it. Okay. So the screen wall isn't in fact shielding the residents from the hammerhead. It would just kind of shield it from the truck that would be parked in the loading zone.
Correct. Instead of doing a full masonry wall along that edge, bear with me.
Sure.
So what we've done here is, I don't know how to get it over. There we go. It's done a heavily vegetated screen along this area and prepared sorry. This is the landscaping plan that was submitted within the sheet. We've got a significant landscaping planting schedule for this, and the area in question that you're talking about is we're trying to heavily landscape that with evergreen trees and shrubs.
Okay. So this turnaround zone is 20 feet from the property line?
Correct.
How close is it to the actual dwellings that are on those properties? To the actual physical
I
buildings?
don't have that answer for you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Driscoll. I reside at 1440 Woodland Road and I have party status. Mr. Anderson, I just had a couple questions, and I want to follow up to what Mrs. Peterman just mentioned, with the loading docks, the proximity of those extra loading docks to the properties on Doral, and the shrubbery that you said is going to be planted there. As I understand, you have 20 feet of space to accommodate a loading dock, plus turning around, plus dense shrubbery to shield the Durrell Road residents from the site of these buildings?
No, ma'am. There's 20 foot of separation between the loading facility and the property line. The loading area or that hammerhead is 20 feet in width, and it's approximately separated from the building of about 10 feet.
Okay.
So
How much space do you have to plant these shrubs that will shield Durrell Road from the site of the loading dock and the sides of the property?
20 feet,
20 feet to plant trees and have loading docks.
correct.
You mentioned that the two extra loading docks are because there's a zoning requirement, that there be additional loading areas for these facilities. You also mentioned, you gave the opinion that the plans as drafted met the township zoning ordinance. As I understand, the township zoning ordinance requires 2 loading docks for these 2 facilities. So my question is, will you or will you not put in these not necessarily necessary loading docks that are 20 feet from Doral Road?
So they're not technically loading docks, they're loading spaces, and they are shown on the plan as part of the conditional use set.
Okay. And am I correct, though, that the zoning ordinance in Abington Township requires 1 loading dock per facility of 20,000 feet or more? Is that correct?
Yes,
So that's 1 loading dock. And then the next unit, the next facility is 12,000, roughly 12,450 square feet. That would also require its own loading dock per the zoning ordinance. Is that correct?
not necessarily. So in this particular case, we're sharing a loading space between the 2 buildings.
And
The
does-
independent living facility doesn't require that much delivery vehicles and so forth. And so in our opinion, we only need 1 designated loading space.
But the zoning ordinance requires 2. Is that correct?
There's 3 shown on the plan.
Okay, so your intention then would be, since 2 are required, that you will at least put 2 in there. Is that correct? Otherwise, it won't meet the zoning ordinance requirements.
We feel that we meet the zoning requirements and the parking requirements.
Okay, it's section 2312 of the zoning ordinance. 1 loaded berth per 20,000 square foot building, which would be building 1, and 1 additional per 20,000 square feet or fraction thereof for a second building. So indeed, it does require 2 loading docks, correct?
It requires actually more than 2, and we're showing 3. We think that we're in compliance.
All right, thank you. You also talked a great deal about parking and your assessment that you have sufficient total parking spaces is based on an assumption that at the most densely populated employee shift will be 19 employees. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's his information that the owner developer provided to you. Is that correct?
Our senior living facility expert that's part of the witness list provided that, yes.
And who is that?
Greg Elmore.
Has Mr. Elmore provided a report reflecting his evaluation that 19 employees would be the maximum number of employees on any given shift?
We've presented an application package that includes a narrative, and his testimony will provide that.
So if the maximum number of employees required on a shift is greater than 19, then in fact, you don't meet the zoning code's requirements for parking spaces. Is that correct?
If it's larger, that's correct.
I also wanted to ask, this revision to the ingress and egress, the northern entrance, when was that suggested? When was that decided to be done? Because that was brand new news tonight, I think, for everyone in this room.
I think that it was discussed in our internal from the last meeting forward.
Now, I assume you probably reviewed the traffic engineer's report, the McMahon report.
And the Representative McMahon is here to testify.
I understand that. You also understand that they project 387 more vehicles present on Woodland on a daily basis as a result of these two facilities on Woodland Road?
I'm not the traffic expert.
Okay, so you didn't review the report.
I've read the report, yes.
Okay. And you don't remember it's 387 additional touches on Woodland Road?
If it's in the report, I have no reason to doubt you.
Okay. You mentioned you changed that northern in and out to a left and right only because the owner developer did not want to send traffic on a northerly direction on Woodland Road. So I guess that's out of a courtesy to the neighbors. But I also want to ask, wouldn't that change also be impacted by the fact that the site distances can't meet what's required by PennDOT?
No, that's not correct.
Okay, not correct. All right. Thank you. I think that's all I have.
Thank you.
I'm Barnett Satinsky, 1301 School Lane. Mr. Anderson, you referred to residential roads and collectors in the area surrounding the proposed facility. How do you regard Valley Road, collector or residential road?
We have a traffic engineer that can give better testimony than me.
With respect to traffic coming up Woodland Road, they would be making ingress with a left-hand turn, is that correct?
If they're heading north, yes.
So they would have to cross the traffic coming down Woodland Road in a southerly direction, is that correct?
That's correct.
And students who would be going to Penn State for classes would have to wait in line until all the traffic passed so that people making ingress into your facility would be able to make that left turn. Is that correct?
Yes, but again, we have a traffic expert here that can testify better on this subject, but the majority of our traffic that comes into the facilities are during off-peak hours and not during the peak trip or peak traffic time along Woodland.
Do you regard as off-peak the hours that students are coming to Penn State campus and leaving the campus to attend classes?
Being a college student in the past, I think it could be a lot of different times during the day.
So it's not one single peak period.
Again, we have a traffic engineer here that can testify.
And finally, you mentioned that people coming south on Woodland who would not be able to make ingress coming down Woodland into the property would be able to pass the property and access the facility through other streets. Wouldn't that require them to clog other roads leading into the residential area?
They would have to access other roads to be able to turn around safely, yes.
Can you mention even one that would give them that access?
Again, we have a traffic engineer that can.
So you cannot.
I'd prefer to let the traffic expert answer.
And with respect, finally, to your suggestion of making U-turns in order to come back up Woodland Road, would the U-turn then be made on Valley Road?
They would have to proceed to a parking area that would allow for the proper turning around movements.
Can you think of one within half a mile of the facility?
Not at this time.
Thank you.
My name's Andy Van Buren. I'm at 1322 Rydal Road. I just have a VANBUREN, 2 words. A quick question. Do you know how many total outside lights are on the facilities?
On the building?
Outside parking lights, out lights off the buildings? And is there a code for how many there have to have?
I don't have the answer for the total amount of lights. However, we did provide a lighting plan that shows the total amount of illumination. There is a requirement within the township code that we cannot have spillover amounts onto neighboring properties.
Yeah, I'm Ed Troffer. I live at 6 Ed Troffer, Trauffer, 1625 Amity Road. You stated earlier with that left turn, right turn requirement coming out that ambulances would be required to follow that left turn, right turn. With that statement that you made, did you talk to, 'cause I used to be an ambulance driver. Did you talk to anybody in EMS or did you talk to the police where they told you they would be required to take a further, slower distance in order to save somebody's life?
No, I have not spoken to anybody.
But you made the statement that that was going to be true. And you made that statement without any knowledge.
I have not spoken to anybody with
So
emergency
the answer is
services.
yes to that. You made that statement without any knowledge. We very interested in your background and experience. You talked about working for this company and for Wawa and all these other gas stations. Very dispersed, you have a lot of diversity in your experience. What percentage of your time have you spent working with residents that are challenging conditional use?
Yeah, I don't understand the relevance.
Well, I'm just trying to get an understanding of diversity.
It's not relevant.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
No.
Rochelle Hittinger. Rochelle Hittinger, 1321 Meadowbrook Court. I would like to pursue the question concerning where it would be reasonable for people to make that turn in order to come back onto Woodland Road. Can you tell me any particular streets or types of areas where it would be reasonable for someone to make that turn?
Not at this time.
Would it be correct that a cul-de-sac would be a reasonable place for a person to make that turn? A residential cul-de-sac?
Potentially.
Are you aware of the fact that there is a residential cul-de-sac at the very end of Woodland Road, directly across Valley? It happens to be called Meadowbrook Court. Are you aware of that?
No.
All right, let me just state for the record that that's where I live and it is a cul-de-sac. All right, next question is it correct that the elevation on lot 2 is approximately 150 to 180 feet above sea level? That was in your report.
That's correct.
And tell me, how high is the building that's being planned? What is the height?
37 feet.
Does that include the HVAC system on top or not?
Probably not.
How high would HVAC system be on top of that?
I'm not an architect.
You're an engineer. Do you know how high an HVAC system would normally be, what that sits on top of the building? Are you indicating that you're not aware of that?
I'm not an MEP engineer and I don't want to give any testimony that I'm not clear about.
Okay, but it would be on top of the existing number that you just mentioned. Let me ask you about the underground parking that you mentioned. Is that underground parking entirely below grade?
Yes.
Okay, so that would not then be, none of it would affect the height of the building?
No.
Thank you. All right, the last question I have is back to that original aerial view that you had. That was one of the first pictures. That's the one. And you indicated that the area is primarily that has a character of being single family lots. can you see in that area, particularly on the, what is it, north or side of Susquehanna and going up Valley? Are you aware of any other commercial buildings in that area? Do you see any commercial buildings?
No,
Do you see any large apartment buildings?
no,
Do you see any restaurants in that area?
no.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tom Stone, 1535 Woodland Road. I'm a resident. I'm also president of the Rydal Meadowbrook Civic Association. So my question is pretty simple. I think when the township engineer was going through some of the conditional use criteria, I believe you were asked the question about lighting, odors, and noise in terms of the impact. And you spent a good deal of time talking about lighting, but the other two were not addressed. And I'm particularly concerned when I realize upon your presentation that there's tractor trailers that will be backing up within 20 feet of our neighbors' property lines. And I'm assuming this can be very early in the morning. So my question is, can you address the other two criteria that were requested of you?
Sure. So any noise would be emanating from any delivery vehicles. We're trying to mitigate that with landscape buffering. Any rooftop units or exhaust fans would be located on the roof that would be generating heating, cooling for the associated buildings and venting of any of the uses inside the building.
And what about odors? Where would the dumpsters be?
The dumpsters are located in the sorry. Anyway, the trash collection is located within this building here, inside the building.
Holy cow.
Sorry. And not an exterior dumpster. So any venting required for an enclosed area would be vented through the roof.
So the odors from the dumpster will be vented through the roof,
Correct.
but they're only about maybe 50 feet from the property of
They would be
residents.
they'd be interiorly and they would be housed inside the building of that area with closed doors, as opposed to an outside trash enclosure, which would have no HVAC collection and venting. It would just be located, within 6 feet of the ground.
Thank you. But in your opinion, you believe that the 20-foot barrier is sufficient to protect our neighbors from the noise of a tractor trailer backing up 7:30 in the morning?
So the operators of the facility can restrict delivery times for these buildings and have it so that it's not being delivered in early hours of the morning or late hours of the night.
But there will be noise, regardless as to what time. There's going to be excessive noise, I'm sure. I mean, that's a reason. 20 feet of trees is not going to protect you from a tractor trailer noise.
Well, your testimony is excessive, but I think it will be mitigated by the buffering and the loading dock or loading zone areas located between the two buildings.
And one final question, if you don't mind. I know you talked about and I didn't take full note of this, but the building height and within code, but also the properties are below grade from that. So isn't the visual effect actually substantially higher than whatever height you have established for the building?
From which perspective? Doral Road?
Correct, because that's below grade. So if a building is 37 feet high, if I'm, I don't know, 10, 15 feet below grade, the visual effect is actually much greater than 37 feet, correct?
It's potentially, yes.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Larry Weilheimer. It's Weilheimer, resident at 1282 Rydal Road. Good evening. I just want to clarify, I may have misunderstood your responses to the township solicitor. If you wouldn't mind putting up Exhibit A4, we already had seen A2, which was the aerial of the entire neighborhood. The solicitor had asked you the question. You indicated you were familiar with the zoning code, the conditional use, section 1806. In particular, I believe he pointed to section B3 that said an improvement which it needs to be not detrimental to the properties in the immediate vicinity. And I believe he asked how this would not be. And am I correct that your answer was that it's permitted as a conditional use? Is that your position as to why it is not a detriment to the properties in the immediate
No,
vicinity?
I said it's a permitted use within the zoning code for an R1 district to have a conditional use for these uses as presented. We're designing the plan to mitigate the impacts associated with the surrounding residential community. I believe that's my full testimony. Where we're heavily landscaping the perimeter. We're designing for limited disturbance for the property. That was part of my full testimony.
I see. And in, I believe it's 1806, G3, community character is another area that you were also directed to that says if the proposal is adjacent to a residential district, the scale of use shall relate to and complement the surrounding area. Can you just explain to me how this relates to and complements the surrounding area?
So again, we're designing a building that is slightly over the allowable building height for a residential zone of 35 feet. We're reducing the impact on the property and consolidating the development area into a smaller area, and we're designing the landscaping and perimeter buffering to shield the buildings and uses.
So just to make sure I understand, so your attempts to mitigate your testimony is to that's why it relates to and actually complements the surrounding area?
That's correct.
I see. And then I just want to go back. I know there's been a great deal of talk about the left turn. If I'm correct, I guess it's a left turn in and a right turn out. Are you familiar? You said you had driven around. Are you familiar with the Levy parking facility that's further up on Woodland, just prior to Old York Road, where it's also a right turn only, or I'm sorry, it's a little bit different. It's a right turn only into that parking facility?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. I'm just curious how this would be delineated so that if you do spend any time in the neighborhood, which I would ask you to please do so, to see how these things relate to the area and complement it. But I'm curious how that would be developed so that these turns would not be made, notwithstanding the desire to have it just be a left and a right.
We would adjust the curb on the northerly side of the entrance and add additional striping and signage.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Gail Weilheimer, 1282 Rydal Road. And although I did speak earlier, I didn't question anyone earlier. So I have a few questions in follow-up to your testimony. First one relates to the independent living dining facility. What is the plan for the dining facility and independent living?
Yeah, we have somebody else who's be able to run through the buildings for you.
Okay. But you were very clear in your question, your answer in questions to a prior examiner that it is not a commercial, it is not an industrial kitchen in the assisted living facility. It's a commercial kitchen. So what type of kitchen will be used in the independent living facility?
Again, I would defer to somebody else in our witness list that can go through the buildings in detail for you and be able to address or answer your questions.
So when you first started testifying about this property, you were talking about the front-facing streets, and you talked about lot 1 being front-facing to Rydal and lot 2 being front facing to Woodland. Is that correct?
Correct.
But those are not the only streets immediately adjacent to this property. Is that correct?
It fronts on,
I'm not
There's a-
talking about what it fronts on. I'm talking about which streets are immediately adjacent to the property.
that's what I'm trying to answer. There's a street called Cloverly Lane that it fronts on the south, well, we'll call it the western property line.
And there's also Doral, which is immediately adjacent, correct?
No,
If you pull up A3, please. No, I think it's A3 actually. Okay. And if you go to the bottom of this.
Yep.
And you talk about the screen, that's Doral Road. The
correct.
back properties, the backyards of Doral Road are immediately adjacent to this property, correct?
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. I thought you were saying, does our property front on Dorel Road?
I didn't ask about fronting. I asked what's immediately adjacent. Is Doral Road immediately adjacent to this property?
No,
The backyard of Doral Road,
the properties that front on Dorel Road are adjacent to this subject property.
so the backyard of Doral is immediately adjacent to lot 2, correct?
Correct.
All right. And the top of lot 2 is immediately adjacent to Orchard Hill. Is that correct?
The properties on Orchard Hill, yes.
So when we talk about the impact on the community, we have more than just where these properties front. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And this property, you asked questions about the height of the proposed property. This would also be impacting for the sightlines, the properties on Orchard Hill. Is that correct?
If the properties are, if the person on Orchard Hill, the properties on Orchard Hill are looking in a southerly or southwesterly direction, they would see this property, yes. Is that what you're asking?
Impact. When we talk, you mentioned the sidewalk on Woodland. Is it your intent to have that be an interior sidewalk on lot 2 or a sidewalk exterior to the property on Woodland Road specifically?
We're providing a sidewalk, an extension of the existing sidewalk that extends along Valley. It almost meets our adjacent property line, and we're extending that sidewalk along Woodland up to our northern property line. Then we have additional sidewalk that extends into the site and allows pedestrian circulation throughout the site.
So let's just talk about the exterior sidewalk. To go from the small existing sidewalk that it immediately connects with Doral to what you're proposing, you would need to either take property from current residents or reduce the size of Woodland Road. What's the plan?
To answer your question, no, the sidewalk within Valley and Woodland are located within the existing right-of-way, and there's sufficient room that we would not have to take any property or ask for or easement. We would be able to connect to that sidewalk within the legal right-of-way to extend the sidewalk.
So then let's go to the next question. What's the point? Where do you think that sidewalk's going to go? If you're familiar with the neighborhood, why do you need to do that?
It's a standard requirement within your subdivision and land development code to provide curb and sidewalk along road frontages as part of a land development application. There's a small road widening of Woodland that is part of this plan along with curbs and sidewalk.
Where do you expect people, separate from the requirements, what's the benefit of doing that?
To allow more pedestrian traffic, or I'm sorry, pedestrian access to various parts of your community.
Are you aware that pedestrians don't use that section of the road because of the danger in the sight lines?
Again, we're not
I'm just
asking
asking if you're aware of that.
We're not asking for waivers at this time. We're not having submitted to land development, and we would not be asking for a waiver of curb and sidewalk.
But sir, part of what you need to show for conditional use is whether or not there's an adverse impact on the community and whether or not this benefits the community and does it comply with the character of the community. You're adding a sidewalk and you're talking about the benefit for pedestrian traffic. If no pedestrians currently walk in that area, how does this benefit pedestrian traffic?
Because you'd be providing a pedestrian access point, and then potentially in the future, if there's sidewalk that's proposed on Woodland Road, you'd have more pedestrian access, safer access for pedestrians.
Are you aware that throughout the adjacent community, there are no sidewalks on Woodland Road that would go if you're exiting this property to the left.
If the if the commissioners did not want the sidewalk to be built and would be willing to grant a waiver, I'm sure that during a land development application, we wouldn't put the sidewalk in, but it was a requirement as part of the submission for the conditional use to show compliance and pedestrian sidewalk from your township traffic engineer that asked for the sidewalk to be put on the plan. So we complied.
So to have conditional use granted, you cannot have adverse impact based on traffic. I know you have a traffic engineer coming, but I want to follow up specifically on your testimony. Your testimony was when people want to turn into the property, if they are coming down Woodland Road towards Valley, they would then have to turn right onto Valley and make a U-turn somewhere in order to get back and make the appropriate turn into this facility. Is that correct?
Yes.
So if there is a quiet U-shaped street near this, and that is used to increase substantial traffic as a cut through to try to make the turnaround, would you agree that that would have an adverse impact on that street?
Yes.
So since Doral is the closest street where people would make an immediate turn, if that street is being used in an increased way from its current quiet residential usage, that would be an adverse impact, correct?
Potentially, yes.
I'm going to look over my notes. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Do you have a plan to modify the sight lines as people go from Woodland to Valley as they leave this property and turn onto Valley? So you testify that people will come out of the property, when they egress the property, they'll turn right. Is that correct? Onto Woodland.
That's correct.
And when they get to Valley, currently people can turn left and right onto Valley. Is it your intention to maintain turning ability both ways?
As part of a land development application, there are more detailed traffic studies that get developed and reviewed more fully with your traffic engineer. And if additional off-site improvements are warranted, the application would be required to do those.
There is currently a very difficult blind turn as you come from Woodland to Valley. Am I understanding you correctly that you do not have any current plans to address that and address the impact on traffic, increased traffic that would come from this facility as it relates to that blind turn? There's no current plan for that.
There's no off-site improvement plan.
I believe the last question I have is when Ms. Cease was asking you questions about wastewater, would you agree with me that the township's director of wastewater management has not been consulted regarding what, if any, impact this will have on the township public utilities?
We have not submitted an application.
So that's yes.
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Camilla Molda, Kamila, Molda, Molda, 1188 Rydal Road. My question is pertaining to the Hammerhead turning point. Is it correct that you mentioned earlier larger trucks such as tractor trailers or of that nature would have to back up in order to turn around?
Correct.
Are you aware that trailers or larger vehicles such as that have a safety feature that involve loud beeping or some other noise that needs to emit when those types of vehicles back up?
Yes, I am.
Do you still consider the shrubbery or the vegetation that you plan to plant in that spot to be sufficient to block out that noise that is designed by nature to be loud in order to alert people?
What I said was we can schedule those delivery times so they're not during early morning, late evening hours. They'd be during the workday.
So you don't think that the vegetation there would be sufficient to block out that particular noise, correct?
I would think that within a certain proximity, somebody would be able to hear that off our property.
Thank you.
No, please return. No, we can't do this. Okay, please take your seat. No. Do any other members of the public want to, or who have party status, want to ask questions?
Hi, it's Steve Booth. I'm 1440 Orchard Hill Lane. So I'm going to give you a little break to start. One of the things from the last hearing, and I'm just assuming that we're talking all the same witnesses from last time. There was a point here, I promise. Character detriment was not covered. Is that you, or who is it we should be asking about that?
I don't understand the question.
So as I understand the conditional use document, it's not pass fail. Every single one of those items have to be hit to the satisfaction of the township, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. When we had the planning commission hearing, I don't know if you remember, I think you were there.
Yes, I was.
At the end of the witnesses that were presented, the first thing the planning commission said was nobody addressed character detriment to properties. It was all very, which I understand, it's important, mechanical type information.
Well, we also have a planner associated with our witness testimony that would provide planning and background use aspect.
So maybe how about I do this? How about I ask the questions and then
He was not here at that hearing.
Okay, is he going to be here at this hearing?
Not this evening, but in a follow-up hearing, yes.
But I thought we were supposed to ask questions of, and okay, that's fine. Let me ask you the question. So we've heard a lot about the hammerhead, the noise, the distance and things of that nature. At the last hearing, there was a experienced real estate professional who estimated that the properties in Durrell would lose about 1/3 their value.
I can stop you right here. I'm not that expert.
Okay. Will you have one? Because I think that the key thing for me is, I don't know how anybody else says what's the definition of a detriment, but how do I ask a question if you don't have somebody prepared? Like, that's what I'm saying.
The crux of his testimony is going to provide general in that section.
But he's going to address house values on Orchard Hill and on Durrell. Well, I'm saying because that was brought up in the planning, so I just want to make sure there's somebody address. I feel someone should address that. Yep. Right, but he will speak to the property values on Durrell and Orchard. Okay, well, I guess I'll have to ask that person then at that point. Thank you.
Eric Warren, 1443 Durrell Road, WEREN. I'm still not clear on the 20, what I've heard is there's 20 feet from the back of unit 1 to the retaining wall that the person right at that curve in Durrell has in his backyard.
So
the distance from that, where you were pointing, to the back of building 1.
greater than 50 feet.
Greater than 50. Where's the 20 feet? Just that road that you kind of see in there?
The 20 foot is the separation between the property line and the paved area.
And
so we've got 20 feet of landscape area, 20 feet of paved area, and 10 feet of green area between.
Okay, because when the question was asked, how much space do you have to put in your screen, your vegetative screen?
20 feet.
20 feet to put that in. Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else who has party status?
Thank you for answering questions. My name is Bruce Bach, BACH. I live at 1408 Stockton. Just really two questions. You mentioned a figure of 1.5 foot candles. Did I hear that correctly for the lighting?
Average of 1 to 2 foot candles, yes.
Why is it that level of intensity since the American Society of Illuminating Engineers lists a figure of merit of 10.5 candles for a parking structure?
I didn't hear what foot candle rating.
Well, you've given essentially,
I just misunderstood. I didn't hear the foot candle rating that you said.
so it's 10 to 10.5. You can look it up.
Okay.
It's a American Society of Illuminating Engineers, and they're saying the intensity of light for a parking structure should be 10-foot candles, and you're talking about providing a measure of 1/10 of that. I question the veracity of the measurement. And second, you did not dimensionalize the spread or the number of emitters of light, which is extremely important.
It's overruled. He can continue to ask the question. Mr. Anderson, do you understand the question that's being asked of you?
I think so.
Okay, can you attempt to answer it, please?
I would agree with you that illumination within a parking structure would be greater than 1 to 2 foot candles, possibly even greater than 10. The parking structure underneath the building is fully enclosed. Light inside that area is not emitting out of the building.
I get it. It's the outside light.
And
And
it's not a parking structure. When you talk about a parking structure, you're talking about an elevated deck. Imagine Abington Hospital with its parking, interior parking structures. What I'm referring to is outdoor parking spaces. And in a residential area, on an average, we'd be looking at 1 to 2 foot candles average.
So that's an average illumination on any square centimeter of area, or is it just around the number of lights, which you did not specify, by the way?
No, it's an average around the entire parking area. There are higher illumination values directly underneath a light fixture.
And the design would affect the spread of that light because it really matters with regard to reflection.
Yes, it would.
Okay. Next question, which you didn't answer, was the exact, if you will, gallonage or cubic footage or square footage, however you want to talk about it, about this particular wastewater facility. Concern is that a failure of said facility would lead to a deluge of water, which would be both a safety and a public health hazard.
Sure. We're not talking wastewater. We're talking.
Well, if it's run in a parking lot, it's not something you or I want to drink.
Mr. Bach, you have to let him finish answering his question.
Wastewater is typically referred to as sanitary effluent. We are not storing or holding sanitary water. We are looking at holding and detaining stormwater runoff that's generated from the added impervious coverage of the site. That would be located underground, underneath the parking facilities that would store that water per the regulated, your township stormwater management ordinances, along with the state regulated ordinances.
How big? How much? That's the question. Very simple. How many gallons? Because they fill up.
Correct. They do fill up. I don't have the answer for that.
Okay.
Be part of a fully engineered land development submission to show compliance with the land development code, your subdivision and land development, along with your stormwater code.
Understood. So that's just one of these things that we just don't yet have an answer for. Have you done any preliminary soil testing to see if there's bentonite or other materials which would adversely affect the drainage of water?
I'm not aware of those tests.
So you have no data one way or the other.
I'm not aware of those tests.
Thank you.
Hi, Keith Reynolds, 1231 School Lane. I just want some quick clarity on this loading zone. Again, this additional loading zone. There's nothing, as far as you know it, there's nothing in this conditional permit to say when they can load or unload, right? You talk about operators setting up hours of delivery times, but that's not part of this conditional use permit, right?
We have not provided that data.
Right. Okay. And the same thing for the loading zone, the extra loading zone. There's nothing to say in the future that the operator won't use this additional loading zone for that purpose. Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Aina Renrick, Aina Renrick, Renwrick, 1429 Doral Road. I wanted to talk about, or I wanted to ask you about this landscape barrier between Building 1 and Doral Road residents. What exactly do you plan on planting there? Because you're removing a lot of trees that are existing. So what are you going to plant?
We're going to plant a variety of mostly evergreen trees.
What
And
type of evergreen? There's a lot of evergreen trees.
a series of green giant arborvitaes, white spruces, hollies.
Mr. Anderson, with this noise coming over here, it's going to be even a little bit more important that you get a little closer to the microphone and speak a little louder because it's distracting.
A series of evergreen trees and shrubs, primarily consisting of green giant arborvitaes, white spruce, hollies, planted at 8 foot in height, other types of deciduous trees to complement and to provide additional variety along that buffer, but the majority of them are evergreen trees.
Saplings?
Our plan is showing 8 foot in height.
8 foot in height, but from Doral Road, do you know exactly how far down Doral Road sits from the proposed property?
Not exactly, no.
Okay. And so 8 feet in height, and you're already saying that the building is what, 37 feet tall? And then if I had to guess, I would say that we're probably 15 feet or greater below the proposed property. So 8 feet in height, I don't really think it's going to be impactful. In sapling trees, do you know the rate of growth for those?
Green giants usually grow anywhere from 1 to 3 feet a year.
Okay. And do you know about how many you will be replacing? Like, because you're taking out trees, so how many are you planting?
We're removing 82 trees and replacing with 164.
Of various species.
Of various natural species, that's correct. Planting size would be 3 to 3.5 caliper at planting.
3.5.
Caliper is a measurement of the diameter of the
What is
trunk.
Right. Okay. To replace the mature trees that are already there. Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. McHugh, do you have any redirect of your witness?
Thank you. John, going back to Exhibit A3, the site plan, there's been a lot of discussion about the modified driveway on northern driveway on Woodland Road. Has that been designed yet?
No,
And is it the developer's intent to coordinate with the township engineer, township traffic engineer, emergency services, et cetera, for their input on any future design modifications?
yes,
Okay. There's also some additional road work along Woodland regarding some road widening and removal of vegetation that we didn't discuss. Could you just go through briefly and describe some of that work?
it was asked of us during our review process to provide a 4-foot road widening along Woodland Road on our side of the street, which would include widening the road by 4 feet, adding curbing and additional sidewalk.
Okay. And there was also some questions about offsite improvements at the intersection with Road. Is it, to your knowledge, is the developer willing to work with the township and township traffic engineer on potential offsite improvements concerning that intersection?
Yes,
Okay. The landscaping plan that you showed, is that in compliance with the township ordinances?
yes,
And specifically the replanting requirements and the species and types of species?
yes,
And I know there's been some questions about the various heights of plantings and types of plantings. Is the developer willing to work with adjacent property owners in the township regarding determination the appropriate species for planting?
yes,
Okay. Is that something that's generally done during the land development process?
yes.
A lot of questions regarding wastewater, sewer, utility connections. Can you just briefly describe that process and whether it generally occurs during the land development process?
Yes, the process for submitting for for submitting for sanitary connections, we would provide analysis and data associated with the buildings and their uses to provide for a flow rate associated with sanitary flow. We provide it's called a PA planning module application that gets reviewed by the Township Sewer Authority along with the township engineer. And we go through a process that then is if upgrades are needed, then that's brought out during the planning module process. Eventually, if it is approved through the various agencies, it gets submitted to DEP for final approval. Stormwater management is also done and vetted through the land development process. We submit fully engineered land development plans that would include, in this case, as I've testified, underground stormwater detention. The location for discharge would be within Woodland Road. If additional off-site stormwater piping upgrades are needed, it's vetted out during that process. The stormwater management design is reviewed by the Abington Township engineer, along with submission to Montgomery County Conservation District for a PA general permit associated with an MPDS or post-construction stormwater discharge. MCCD or Montgomery County Conservation District reviews for the state, but it is a state permit that would get issued as long as we show compliance.
As it relates to the water and sewer, there was some concerns regarding the age of the infrastructure that we're connecting to. Have you had experience in other projects connecting to older infrastructure?
Yes, it gets reviewed and analyzed during that submission process I just explained. And if upgrades are needed, then they would be required as part of the development process. The township has sewer impact fees that also get paid in addition to any required offsite improvements.
Okay, and then finally relating to the hammerhead area and the loading zones, is it your opinion that the proposed loading areas comply with what's required under the zoning ordinance?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions of Mr. Anderson at this time.
Thank you, Mr. McHugh. I neglected to ask if there was anyone who was on Zoom who has party status who would like to ask questions of Mr. Anderson. So if you are online and you have party status, please raise your hand and you will be acknowledged by someone who can see. Is there anyone raising their hand wishing to speak? We certainly can. You can get us that number at, even if we can't do it now, we'll do it at the beginning of the next hearing. We'll note it for the record. Okay. So it's roughly about 30 people who are online who are not commissioners. Okay. Mr. Heleniak, do you have any questions limited entirely to Mr. McHugh's redirect? Ms. Cease, do you have any questions limited entirely to Mr. McHugh's redirect? Does anyone else who have party status have any redirect of Mr. Anderson limited entirely to the redirect? And what I mean by that is we can't go back over things that were brought up earlier. We can't bring up new things. It is strictly limited to what was just asked on redirect. Commissioner Henry asked me a question that I'm going to ask now regarding the aerial rendering, which is excuse me, there's a plan represented in A3. Is there a corresponding aerial rendering that goes along with A3? Or is it just what you've presented this evening, Mr. Anderson?
I'm not sure I understand. Sorry.
Did I state it properly? So we have A3.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Maybe I'm not understanding. Commissioner Henry's going to ask you your question.
Okay, so I'm wondering if there's something like this that represents what we're looking at in A3. So the CAD representation that we're looking at, the U shape, I want to see the hammerhead if we're able to. Is there
I think I understand. You mean, is
like a
there
perspective like corroborated?
not submitted and not
Yes.
part of this?
Yes. Oh, so it's not available.
I don't have it available.
Okay, thank you.
Do any of the commissioners who are online have any further questions? Okay. We are going to break at this time. We are going to recess until November 29th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. in this room. While the township will post notice of the hearing date on the website, and it will be available on the website, there will not be any further advertisement in the paper. So this is the official notice that we are in recess until November 29th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. And with that, we are concluded for the evening. I can turn it back over to Commissioner Hecker if he's still on, or to Commissioner Vahey. We're not adjourning. We're just done for the evening.
We can officially recess the proceeding. Thank you.